Hello, everyone. My name is Mariana Ramirez, and I'm the Manager of Strategic Initiatives at the Patricia and Philip Frost Art Museum at Florida International University. And I'm so excited to welcome you to our first ever virtual Stephen and Dorothea Green Critics Lecture featuring Dr. Deborah Willis. We will have about 10 minutes for questions at the end of Dr. Willis's talk. So please feel free to put your questions in the chat, and I'll be collecting them throughout and choosing a few to ask Dr. Willis at the end. I would now like to introduce our director, Dr. Jordana Pomeroy.
Thank you very much, Mariana, and thank you so much, everybody out there, for joining us today via Zoom for the Green Critics Lecture Series. I want to thank Stephen and Dorothea Green for endowing this series a touchstone for the Frost Art Museum, which has brought movers and shakers in the art world to South Florida since 1981. I would also like to thank the members of the Frost Art Museum. Membership dollars allow us to keep admission free year-round and provide programming to our community. And we'll be adding information on becoming a member to the chat box. I should also mention that we are open and we are open safely, and we invite you to come take a look at our websites to see how you may visit, which is by appointment only. Before I introduce today's speaker, please note in your calendars our virtual Breakfast in the Park lecture on Sunday, December 6th at 11 a.m., when Jeffrey Gibson will present our virtual lecture. Gibson's multimedia practice considers the cultural and artistic traditions of his Cherokee and Choctaw heritage within contemporary and queer culture. I hope you'll be able to join us for his lecture. Unfortunately, this year you'll have to provide your own croissants and Bacardi, but you can double up in 2021. Today, I am delighted to introduce our speaker, who is represented with the photograph Here's Carrie at Euro Salon, in our current exhibition, House to House, Women, Politics, and Place. In this work, Carrie takes on added significance if one knows that the subject is artist and writer Carrie Mae Weems, and that the salon is in Eatonville, Florida, the childhood home of Zora Neale Hurston. Beyond that lies the meaning of beauty shops to Black women, which is a theme in Willis's photography and in our exhibition, which investigates private and public places where women command authority. Willis has successfully established a dual career as an art photographer and as one of the nation's leading historians of African-American photography and curator of African-American culture. She is university professor and chair of the Department of Photography and Imaging at the Tisch School of the Arts at NYU, where she teaches courses on photography and cultural histories, visualizing the Black body, women, and gender. She is also the director of NYU's Center for Black Visual Culture. In 2000, she was awarded a MacArthur Fellowship, also known as the Genius Grant. She was a Richard D. Cohen Fellow in African and African-American art at Harvard University, as well as a Guggenheim Fellow. This year, Willis curated an exhibition at the Park Avenue Armory featuring artwork by women responding to the 100-year anniversary of the Vote for Women campaign. In a 2018 interview, Willis said, "The important thing for me is how we create a national discussion about images that are difficult to talk about and images we are embracing. And that's why we are here today." Will you please give a warm welcome, which you can in the chat box, to Deborah Willis.
Thank you, Jordana, and thank you, Mariana and Carmen, for your invitation. It's really exciting to be here and to be virtually here and to be the first. It's really important to think about this exhibition in many ways. I have I'm excited that my photograph is in there, and as a result of the invitation, I started to think about what ways I could explore in the talk about the theme. And so I wanted to, so I'm borrowing the words entitled Women Creating Nouns, Not Adjectives, Vote for Women. And it's borrowed from Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and it offers a framework to introduce works by these women, and as well as historical works that I'm sharing here today. The artists and the photographers that I'm including in this talk reflect on that history in various ways as they celebrate through dress, create and reconstruct portraits, restage objects in public, and the impact to think about their struggle to vote. One of the important things for me is to think of this critical year as specifically through voting. But Black women were actively involved with the movement early on. Historian Rosalind Terborg Penn, she observed that African-American women's suffrage strategies of the 19th century combined demands for Black women's right to vote and civil rights for all Black people. Women wrote books, cookbooks, and articles, organized tea parties, parades, and conventions, demanding suffrage based on the Citizenship Clause of the 14th Amendment, and or calling for a federal amendment to enfranchise women. Black women had been overlooked in the historical memory of suffrage movement, but they were not deterred. You will see here that many of the artists' works, as well as mine, were inspired by activism of Black women and those whose names that have been overlooked, as well as the white women who made interventions for the fight for the right to vote. And so I want to start with sharing my screen. So just to start out with, this is an image from my project that I'm using clotheslines as a theme of the work and thinking about domestic work with women, as just to think about women's work is never done and never praised, but also to use my own photographs and to see this early image of women activists, the colored women's voter registration in 1913. Let's see. Okay, it just seems like okay, this is it. So I made sheets and pillowcases of women, portraits of women and their names: Sojourner Truth, Frances Ellen Harper, Watkins, Margaret Mary Washington, Nannie Helen Burroughs, Adelle Hunt Logan. So the names that rolled off our tongues: Ida B. Wells, the importance of Mary Church Terrell, and all of the women. And I thought it was really important to have their portraits made, but also to show that at home they're taking care of their family, and then the activism in the club rooms that they're talking about the right to vote. But this is a photograph I found. It's called "Awaiting for Suffrage," and I found this quote that I thought was just amazing. And this is a 1890 something like that photograph. In 1872, founding member of the American Women's Suffrage Association, Frances Ellen Watkins Harper wrote, "Day after day did Millie Green just follow after Joe and told him if he voted wrong, to take his rags and go." And I found that just so amusing when I found this image of a woman who's washing a man's clothes and hanging to dry. And I can imagine that could be Joe, as she's washing and she's telling him he should vote correctly. So these are some of the images that I found and recreated: space, in terms of dress, how dress was important, how becoming speakers were central to this narrative, but also looking at this in terms of ways of how do we see women and the work. They're in sewing clubs. They are, and this is Ida B. Wells, and we can see the range. And this is one of the early images that I found: Headquarters for Colored Women Vote. And it's a 1913 meeting. We see this crowd of younger and older women. We see women who are wearing banners and wearing fancy shoes and feeling really proud about their experiences. And these moments that I wanted to share were just in terms of how women protest in Washington in front of the White House during the Wilson administration, and demanding that they have a right to vote. And their banners are here, and to ask freedom for women is not a crime. So many women, as we can see from the films that have been shared with us over the past month, is that they were beaten, they were arrested, they were really abused. And Black women with white women were working together, and then some of the white women did not want Black women to march with them and tried to move them to the back of the parade or the moments of protest. But Ida B. Wells did not go along with that, and she marched along with all of them. In thinking about women and the importance how women were part of this movement, these are photographs in 1934 where women who were fighting for freedom and fighting for the right to have a voice in Congress and in Senate. This is a national crime convention that Howard University students stood outside of the state capitol and had noose around their necks to push for them to fight for a crime, that lynching was a crime, and have that bill passed. Really important to think about space. And as I mentioned earlier, the beauty shop was essential space for women to take citizenship classes, to prepare for voting. Other places were important was places like the Sugar Shack, which was a juke joint at night. And then the day, you can see women and men standing in line to vote. You see how they're dressed. You see that they're ready to prepare for the moment to transform their communities based on the disenfranchised experiences they were having at the time. This is the 1960s. But here we begin to see the beauty of what's important when community comes together. This is a photograph by Bruce Davidson, and this is a woman who probably just left the beauty shop to show that her body is important, that it's central, that she is seen as full citizen. She's wearing her pearls, jewelry is central. She is wearing her hairstyle, and she's arrested because she's trying to, the right to vote. Fannie Lou Hamer was a Mississippi sharecropper in 1962. She volunteered to register to vote, even though she was putting her life in danger. She endured harassment, eviction, arrest, and beatings to become a key organizer in Mississippi Freedom Summer of 1964. She says, "I guess if I had any sense, I had been a little scared, but that wasn't the point of being scared. The only thing they could do was kill me." And, that didn't matter to her. She really wanted them to remember that her voice was important as she picks up the mic and again, going to the beauty shop, having conversations, where women are wearing their jewelry, is again, her hairstyle, the pride that these women had to make a decision, photographed by Ernest Withers, first vote. And here is a photograph I made of Carrie Mae Weems. It's a central image for me. It's in the moment in Eatonville where we are exploring and researching Zora Neale Hurston, and she's trying to create the style of Zora Neale Hurston, but also her activism in her community as she followed Zora Neale Hurston's life. And this is work by Adama Delphine Fawundu. And it's an image that shares the knowledge of the importance of history. And the title is "In the Face of History, Freedom Cape." It's constructed from historical documents printed on fabric of faces of Black women transposed on each document as she bears witness. As we celebrate 100 years since the ratification of the 19th Amendment, this series is symbolic of the continued struggle for Black women to be treated fairly as citizens of the United States. So we see that moments are often lost, but we see that she's using the archive. We have a photograph of Harriet Tubman. We have a photograph of Shirley Chisholm, and the cape is worn as a protection, as a stylized protection. But she's asking the question, how can our simulated truths impact our present and future understanding of self and humanity? With a woman at the center, this project rethinks, reimagines, and reveals the role that women of African descent played in American and world history. But just a wonderful way of rethinking history, text, image. And here's the detail of the quilt, as well as coat. We see hairstyles, we see braids, we see moments, and then we see this wonderful portrait of Bring US Together, Vote Chisholm. And this is another photograph and installation by Lori Novak. And Lori Novak, she creates this piece, and it says, when women won the right to vote in 1920, voting was in practice only guaranteed for white women. And she decided to create a kind of an homage to women such as Sojourner Truth and Mary Church Terrell and Nannie Helen Burroughs, Black suffragists, and honor along with Sikela Sa, who fought for voting rights for Native Americans, Elizabeth Eckford, one of the first students to desegregate schools, and Stacey Abrams, who we all know today. So the picture is seen, their pictures are in a punctured medicine blister pack. It's the frame through which to view these archival images. Through openings made by pushing out medication to relieve pain, we can view the past and imagine a future, and a just future, a more just future. Susan K. Grant is also looking at the profiles of the women and using shadow portraits of, this is one of Adelle Logan Hunt. And Adelle is in this image, and she's recreating the older photographs. And Adelle was one of the stronger spokeswomen during that time period, and how Susan is thinking about reflecting and reconstructing these moments of the women who've been omitted from retelling these events. And this is a work by, just a wonderful work, just to think about what do we think and look through the experience of, through the eyes of Nikisha Durrett of Magnolia. And it's during the spring and summer, she collected fallen leaves from a towering magnolia tree in Rock Creek Park in a cemetery in Washington, DC. So she's thinking about the two pandemics, the COVID-19 and the continued police brutality against Black bodies. She used the cemetery as a space for processing her anxiety and her grief. Inspired by the hashtag Say Her Name movement, she began to look at the names and draw the names of the women in this experience who died. And she created this wonderful installation that brings back the intersection of race and gender, but also thinking about the actual tree. She writes that the golden brown and tough as leather on one side, velvety soft on the other, fallen magnolia leaves possess an often uncelebrated radiance and resilience. For many, the magnolia flower is the showstopper. However, it is the magnolia leaf that long after its death withstands rain, wind, and the lawnmower, bedeviling gardeners who find them a hassle to work with and to discard. Even after death, the leaf refuses to be erased and forgotten. And so this is a wonderful metaphor for her to rethink how to use gardening and the women who passed away as a result of the experience of police brutality. And this is Breonna Taylor, the most recent one that she created. Zalika Azim, she's also a photographer who's interested in looking at women who are preparing for meetings in the home. You know, there's wallpaper, there's the kitchen table, there's a dining room table, women who work collectively to establish a space to have discussions. And so she created this kind of strip of wallpaper to reimagine moments where women are shaping the moments of activism from the 19th century, and then also creating a way to reference their stories by attending meetings, having beauty around them, such as wallpaper, having photographs in frames. And so when she decided to look at historical archive, she looked at living rooms and church rooms and gardens to create a sense of space and place for women who made a difference in this moment of change for women to right to vote. When thinking about this talk and thinking about this history, this is a photograph by Roland Charles, and it's a photograph of a beauty shop in the South. But we see in the upper left above the frame, above the mirror frame, there is a stop police brutality. There is a freedom vote. There's signs of activism within this beauty shop. A woman is getting her hair styled and not while she's reading. And then also we know that these are places that were subversive spaces for women to learn how to read and write, but also to prepare for the difficult questions ahead as they prepared for the vote. This is one of my photographs that I created. This is my mother. She's seated. She had a beauty shop, and she's seated in the chair, and one of her colleagues that she attended beauty school with is there. But there are rules in the beauty shop that I found fascinating that, limit your phone calls to 3 minutes, no children should be running, children should not be, they should have reading material. So I find it amusing the way that women are teaching lessons of not only citizenship, but etiquette during a time such as when beauty is central. Joy Gregory, also as, just a close-up of posing beauty, getting ready, using her red lipstick as armor. These are two other photographs in the salon as women prepare for their days ahead. And two stylists in 2010 in Florida as they prepare for an evening out, as they prep for a moment of beauty. And this is a sense of how women take care of each other and how the self is explored through these moments of activism. And this is Sade McConan, and her work is focused on a history of migration in Black communities across the globe. Her series is Astral Sea, and she is looking from Ethiopia from the 14th century to monuments and totems. She is prepared to wear the cape and create a performance piece, as she found that as Ethiopians traveled to other places, the blue and black fabrics represent water, and the mirrored patterns represent bodies that have been drowned at sea, while symbolizing protection, healing, and memorialization. Wearing it in a performance spiritually activates the work, embodies and evokes the women, and honors the many lost lives in the Atlantic and the Mediterranean Sea. But she's also thinking and reconsidering ways of how women have used the intersection of feminism and migration and state-sanctioned violence to work together, to shift the movement, create narratives to work together. And here's an installation shot of her figure wearing the full robe and gown. So the ceremony that she's grappling with the long history of how women have been dehumanized and how communities are under pressure. And this is a silent, quiet moment as she prepares for a way to dismantle the difficult moments that women are having today with voting. Anna Teresa Fernandez, one of pieces that I love about her work is a performance piece. It's shoe sculpture, and she explores beauty and women and aspects of border crossing. It's a witty piece as she is thinking about not only going out at night, but how women prepare to go out with high heel shoes and painful shoes after a hard day of work, but also preparing for voting rights. Imagine women going to try to vote and wearing a high heel shoe and the pain that it caused. So the freezing of the shoe as she creates the performance piece, she uses her refrigerator to freeze the shoe, and as she performs and walks through the streets with the wearing the ice sculptured shoes, they melt. And as they melt, another performance of pain, and the ice becomes a central way of how beauty and pain is synonymous. Sama Ashalbi piece, Adjudicating the Jezebel, is a mixed media textile wall hanging, and it honors the women who were sworn in 2019, specifically the Michigan Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib in her Palestinian embroidered tunic. She's swearing in, and she's proud to wear her Palestinian dress. It contains electoral first votes for women. And so she's celebrating a range of women and the controversy and criticism that being first, what happens when women dress a certain style that's outside of the expression of Western culture. So she is challenging that, and she's using this experience of a stitched robe and tunic as she celebrates Palestinian women and Muslim women who create narratives about identity and resilience and women's labor. Here, it is to construct a tension between cultural identity as she trailblazes as a congresswoman in the Congress this year. So it's just a way of looking and preparing women. And there's also a self-portrait as a close-up of one of the pieces that Sama created in honor of her. This is Jennifer Ling Douchet. She's from San Antonio. Hit me with your best shot, as she says. This year will celebrate the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment. She says in 1920, this did not give all women the right to vote, as Asian American women could not vote until 1952. Native American women could not vote in all 50 states until 1957. And a majority of Black women could not vote until 1965. We vote to create a change and see our communities and values reflected in our elected officials. Americans are being confronted with their icons and their fetishes. And she is looking at erasure of her story. And she says voter suppression through barriers of registration, ID requirements, lack of early voting, laws, intimidation. She's exercising the right to vote. And so the title, Hit Me With Your Best Shot, I'm going to wear my jewelry. I'm going to, celebrate beauty. I'm going to dismantle the power through beauty with her sense of her nails. There are portraits on her nails. There are the Civil War soldiers on her bracelet, but she's pushing forward as she tries also to be inclusive, have America be more inclusive in relationship to voting. And here she is walking, creating her own flag. She invited women to write words on beads, and she sent it to in honor of the history of the 100th anniversary, but also what women are thinking about. She wrote one of the earlier women that had a photograph of Harriet Fortin Purvis, Anna Julia Cooper, and then use your voice, and then someone wrote, our gender is valid. And Mabel Ping Hu Lee is another person that is part of this history. And so when we look back at this piece that she travels through the streets of a dead-end street, that the flag is in honor of all of the women who've been ignored. And here is the piece that she leaves in the middle of the street. Just a powerful way of involving community into creating stories about experiences that relate to voting and the history and the future. This is Rose DeSano, and Rose it's entitled Unsung Heroines, Absent Monument Series. During a time where public spaces have become problematized and politicized, this piece engages the public in virtual monument project honoring women who deserve to be celebrated for their unrecognized historic, contemporary, global, and local contributions to voting. Inspired by the 19th Amendment, Rose virtual monument has been erected in honor of African-American leader Augusta Chisel and feminist Victoria Woodhull. And the virtual rotation displays Sarah Parker Ramon and Italian suffragist Rosa Finetti Levi, and also champion of who's also a champion of voting revolution, virtually installed in the Arlington Cemetery across from the tomb of the unknown soldier. This physical mirroring memorializes the endless number of unknown women who continue the work required to ensure the right to vote for all women, regardless of class and race. It's a wonderful concept. And just to imagine that she's in, and we are all in the Arlington Cemetery as we think about this experience, as we consider this moment. And here we see the women, we see buildings of power, and we see this other installation close up as she's placing these images and thinking about these women whose histories have been lost to the archive. She is also central, and we see on the bottom left, this is a photograph of Dr. Susan Mariah McKinney Stewart. She was the first African-American woman doctor in New York State, and Emma Stebbins, first women artist to receive a public art commission in New York City. And so here again, we see these stories, and we see the importance of community and research and the archive. And as she places this in Central Park, that's missing from monuments that we just received a monument just now. And this is work that we see that's so central, and to think about how we as activists are looking at histories and to think about ways to tell stories through the experience of the 19th Amendment, but also through the experience of ways to consider Oshun and Orisha. This is Yolaine Rodriguez, and she says that this work is a celebration. She is giving birth to Orisha is giving birth to a generation of revolutionary women. It's a multimedia project that incorporates fashion and handwoven panels, video, and photography. And inspired by Oshun, the Orisha of fertility, she conceptualized a wearable art piece in response to the concept of birthing a revolution. The handwoven piece Oshun wears is a bright yellow dress. There's a cape. It brings together indigo blue threads mimicking the Atlantic water, and also the ancestors who crossed. She says, we stand on the shoulders of our ancestors and the passing of the amendment. And she says she's inspired by the Black women that during that early period and stages of the movement who persevered for a better future. They trusted that the next generation would continue the fight. And her work aspires to be aware of that and be a part of that next generation of Afro spirituality and Afrofuturism. And here we see this beautiful crown that she creates and also celebrates the sense of the future of birthing. And finally, the last piece is just a piece by Jamie Sue Woon, and it's a video piece, so it's a 4-minute piece, 5-minute piece, but I just wanted to read an introduction to this work. And throughout America, women organized tea parties for meetings and fundraisers to support the movement. The Women's Suffrage Party sold Ceylon tea and gunpowder and oolong tea and other charitable brands, equality tea. Yet the history of tea is steeped in inequality, driven by colonialism, war, and appropriation. In this short film, Equality Tea, Sun Wu brews tea while drawing parallels between the fraught histories of the tea trade and the suffrage movement. And it's created by her. The score is by Matt Tilton, and based on the 1895 suffrage anthem by Augusta Gray Gunn, commissioned for the Laundromat Project and the Park our Avenue Armory.
Dr. Willis, thank you so much. This was wonderful. I would like to, before we start taking some questions, I would like to remind everyone that once again, you can see Dr. Willis's photograph. Here's Carrie at Euro Salon in our current exhibition, House to House, Women, Politics, and Place. This exhibition was made possible with support from the Funding Arts Network, and the exhibition will be on view through February 7th. We are open to the general public on select days of the week. We'll put information on visiting the museum in our chat box. So to start off first, Dr. Willis, could you tell us how have you been doing during the pandemic, during this remote work time? Have you actually had like more time to work, or has it been a little bit harder during this time period?
I'm working, I thought I worked a lot before. I'm working more and more because you know, this has been a difficult time, as we all know, just to deal with public grieving, but also the calls of people who are interested in trying to understand what's happening in the world. And so people are calling me and asking to give talks or read something or be a part of a conference or discussion about changing what's happening in the world today. So it's been a very busy time.
Mm-hmm. How do you balance either now or even prior to the pandemic? You know, you have the dual career as both a professional photographer as well as writing projects. Do you kind of do both at the same time, or do you try and carve out certain periods? How does that work?
Yeah, balance does not work. So I always try to think that people talk about work-life balance. There's no balance. You know, my days are sometimes like 14-hour days, and it's really important to think about the fact that I'm inspired by life, I'm inspired by storytelling, and I'm really interested in, you know, of course, teaching you know, that's what I do, but also interested in getting my stories told through the work as I try to create my art in as often as possible. Sometimes I don't have an opportunity to show my work as much as possible. That's why I'm so excited that you're including my photograph in the exhibition, but also I'm just constantly thinking about the next project. You know, mm-hmm. My husband says, "Okay, don't think of another one." You know, I'm like, oh, in the middle of the night, I'm waking up thinking, oh, this story hasn't been told. You know, so let's work on this story. So I'm excited about that.
Okay. I'm curious, with your curator hat on and artist hat, do you see a generational shift in how young artists are confronting difficult topics?
No, I mean, just Jamie's last piece. I'm excited about the work that the next generation is exploring. I mean, just the history, the archive is constant. It's central to the next generation, and I'm inspired by that. I'm inspired by Rose's piece, and to think about that, but also inspired by the students we have in the classroom who are asking the difficult questions that, you know, how can we make a difference? How can we change? I'm working closely with a colleague, Ellen Toscano, on a book and sessions on women and migrations. And we're interested in telling women migration stories and having them write about the experiences. So having that opportunity, and also, you know, I've worked with Rosie Gordon Wallace in her recent project. And so it's just pretty exciting to see that, you know, I'm in a show with Rosie that's with people who are, you know, 2 generations younger in terms of the work, but we're all thinking the same way about how do we talk about our stories that show a full life experience.
Great. And we know Rosie's here today, actually. She said to say hi in the chat, and that you look fabulous. So I have a great question from James Thomas. He wrote, with the similarities between current times and the past, how do you think COVID has affected the ways women are communicating their stories as we continue to strive for equality from home?
I think it's the same. I mean, I think the women had cottage industries in the 19th century, that they were washerwomen. They were in their homes. They had children. Some children had fevers. And they had to take care of the older people in their families. They had to work and they had to organize. And that's why I created the piece using the clothesline as a metaphor, because I see the labor of women is central to this experience, that women are, thinking about beauty, thinking about their presentations, thinking about how do we tell our stories with sense of pride, but they're also working and cooking and making cookbooks, as I mentioned earlier, and writing about their experiences. And so we know this is happening, and it's the same today, that people are at home, they're at their dining table, not eating anymore, they are cooking and doing homework and writing at the same time. So it's all coming together in that way.
Great. And then my colleague, Amy Galpin, just sent me a great question. Your books and exhibitions have truly propelled our field and encouraged a rethinking about the history of photography. What are some important questions and inquiries that are still needed in the coming years about photographic images?
What are the still questions that we need?
Yeah, yes.
I think that what I'm experiencing now more and more is that younger photographers and older photographers are looking at the archive. I have a colleague, Lori Novak, who teaches a class on the archive, and her students are looking at stories from the photographic realm, but also being able to connect to the histories of not only medicine, but through family histories, through difficulties. So I think that what I'm trying to do with my work is to explore the archive and continue to let people know that our existence in the 19th century and the 18th century was as important as it is today. That the battles that we've had, we know that people challenge us all the time. As a woman of color, a Black woman who's writing about stories that most people don't write about, there's a sense of doubt, like, oh, did this really happen? Is this really something that's valid? And so my books, I want to ensure that people know broad stories and know that we existed, and know that we existed with pride and not with just pain. That's what I'm exploring.
Okay. What advice could you give emerging photography students?
Keep working. I say that all the time, keep the camera out, just use your camera as your voice. Don't get discouraged because other people will discourage you. So you don't need to do it for yourself. But I say all the time to find a good narrative, find a good story, become a storyteller, and thinking of your life as significant and other people's lives as significant, to create stories about what they see that's wrong, what they see that's beautiful, what they see that's embracing, but to continue to photograph.
And I'm curious, kind of following up to that, do you have recommendations for students when you're photographing communities that are not your own? How can you do so with dignity, compassion? What are some of the things that students should keep in mind as they try to capture different moments that might not be their own area or community?
It's about humanity. And that's what I have to remind people about. It's not, quote, their own. It's about humanity. And if we could all embrace the fact that we are interested in a just future, that we are interested in stories and not, and so the intentionality of the photograph, of the photographer, the intention of going into a community to photograph, or intention of how it's going to be used, that they want to expose beauty and not just drama and trauma. That's the important aspect of it. But also talk to people in the community, be able to feel that their voice is important, that the community's voice is important that they're photographing, and or the people that they're photographing is important.
I read in an interview, and as well as on your TED Talk, you had mentioned that when you were a photography student, you had a professor say that you took the place of a good man. And I was curious, throughout every accomplishment you have gained throughout your years, did you update him when you published a book? Did you send things? Have you been showing him exactly what kind of place you took?
No, I didn't give him the power after, it's amazing because everyone, people are saying, was it? And they're trying to give me, was it? And, and I'm like, no, he knows who he is, and I'm sure because I'm an alum of Philadelphia College of Art, that University of the Arts, that they've seen the work that I've done. And, it's just, it's sad that there were 18 guys in that classroom. And I know none of them except for one who's creating fantastic work. So it's amazing in terms of how people are silenced, and women can be silenced. And it was hurtful. And I meet women today who say it still happens to them. I meet husbands today who said, my wife doesn't make work because of a faculty member who said the same thing. So I think it's really important that, it was really difficult for me to show that photograph because, I'm nude, I'm pregnant, and I'm, my son said, well, Mom, you need to tell this story. And so having that encouragement to have the work done at the Brandywine Workshop, which, and that collection, as a result of it being in that collection, they also sold some of the pieces to other museums. So my work is now in other museums as a result of the Brandywine Workshop creating that piece for it.
No, that's so interesting. We actually had Judith Hernandez on a virtual panel a couple of weeks ago with a young artist, Itzel Basualdo. So they had about maybe a 45-year age difference, but they were also struggling with seeing the same exact things in art school that even though there was this 45-year difference. So what would you recommend how best, as we progress within our field, women as professionals in the arts field, how can we help the younger generation to feel empowered and to avoid some of these things that are still happening in institutions?
I think they're empowering me. I'm telling you, Elaine Rodriguez, she is just fabulous. I mean, the positive and strength that she offered in terms of creating a piece about the Orishas and to think about birthing a new generation of revolutionary women and men. And so I think that having an exchange, having the opportunity, I don't think it's hierarchical. I think it's like we're across the table and we're learning from each other. I know what I know, but I am fascinated with what, just to think about Nikisha. She's looking at magnolia leaves. I walk past magnolia leaves all the time. I would never think and know the history of the strength of magnolia leaf, but to think about, the metaphor that she's using. So so I think that it's reciprocity. I think that we're all working together. It's not sense of what I could give them, so as long as we're in communication, I think that that's really important.
Great. Well, thank you, Dr. Willis. Thank you so much. This has been a wonderful Saturday afternoon, and I feel so grateful to have this opportunity to ask you questions and chat. And thank you so much for sharing your artwork, your time, your curatorial projects. We are all better for it. So thank you very much. And I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. And I hope you all have an amazing afternoon. Goodbye. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.